So my name is Doug Welling. I have a company called The Sustainable Athlete. Very thankful that Colleen's invited me to do some run clinics here, as well as some other talks, as the one we're going to cover, the topic we're going to cover today. I also coach rowing at Bowdoin College, and through the years of coaching, I've really found that I love the science of training. I love the active training and moving energy, but the longer and longer you're involved with endurance sport, you realize that psychology is a huge component of it, and it's a huge component in everyday life. And this title doesn't have to be mental training for the endurance athlete. It could be just as equally applied to just raw stress management or everyday life, which I think is pretty significant. So we always say to our rowers that the strongest muscle in your body is the one between your ears, and it's all about the mental training, mental strength and attitude. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and I'd love to get people to interject. To just set the tone, we'll start off with a few quotes and sort of set the stage for each one. The first being this one at the top of Willie Boett: "There is no substitute for self-belief." Does anyone, probably not in this room, anyone's going to know about Willie Boett, unless Colleen does from cycling. Okay. Willie Boett was the soigneur on the Festina Tour de France cycling team in 1996 that got busted for the big drug doping scandal that's now really set the tone for many, many years of drug doping in cycling and in running and all sorts of endurance sport. But he wrote a book called Breaking the Chain, and this was a quote from that book. And the set the tone on this quote: he had an athlete on his team who was the French national champion in time trial. His name was Richard Virenque. And Willie Boett and Virenque had a very oil and water type of relationship. They hated each other. And the soigneur on the team is basically the team. They do it all, but they could be viewed as a team slave in a way. They have to provide massage, provide medical equipment, get bikes ready, get all sorts of equipment ready. And before, I think it was the French national title for time trial national championships, Richard Virenque went to Willie Boett and said, "I want you to give me the most powerful drugs that you've got in your entire arsenal." And they were mixing cocaine, heroin, caffeine with other stimulants into a product they called Pot Belch, and it was just a giant stimulant to go out and try to achieve a better performance than what they normally could do. So at any rate, they'd had a bad, rough 24 hours leading up to this point. So Willie Boett basically said, "Screw you." Went and prepared the syringe and put saline solution in the syringe, and then injected him. And he looked him in the eyes and said, "You were going to fly today. You were going to absolutely rip their legs off." But deep in his mind, he thought, "I'm sabotaging his cycling career. I can't wait for him to go out there and have a completely flat experience." Virenque went out there. He did rip everybody's legs off. He won by sort of a record-breaking distance, and then he came back to Willie Boett that day and he pulled him aside and said, "Whatever you gave me today was the most incredible drugs I've ever had in my life. It felt amazing." And so it was simply that placebo effect, that belief in whatever was going through that needle was going to make him perform better that day. He certainly had the capability physically, as proven by the salt and water, but it was the belief that really tipped him over the edge. And so in that book, he talks about all the doping they did, but a lot of the times it became a real mental crutch for the athletes. Fortune favors a prepared mind, that's a pretty basic one. And then the last one, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. I think that's pretty important. It's a concept we'll come back to quite a bit. And attitude being the fundamental foundation for really everything else in the mental aspect. It's really the base level founding pillar of mental strength when you're, yes?
That was from Man's Search for Meaning, that Frankel wrote
Right.
about after seeing the war, changed him. It's a very well-known book for attitude and depression and people
Absolutely.
who don't have that self-confidence.
Right, and the Holocaust survivors, and yes, very intense stuff. So when you strip someone away of everything, in that case, that's the ultimate extreme, that they still have the thinking that they still have the capability to choose their own attitude in that situation is pretty empowering. But in sport, it's much milder than that, honestly, the circumstances that were talked about in that, related to that quote. but very, very truthful. And you can always change your perception of the position you're in, or how hot the temps are, all those things. So just to illustrate, we'll go through, jump around a little bit, say in endurance sport, we'll talk about what's happening to the body as you prep mentally for a big event that you're prepping for. And we'll also talk a little bit, again, about just general stress management tools that you could use in everyday life. And it'll be fun to pick apart and see what works for different people. This is just a great graphic representation of the psychological component. So if we're training for a sport, whether it's running or, in my case, rowing or triathlon, this was from a UK study and illustrates 40% of your performance is really dependent on your physical fitness. Depending on the sport, 40% is your skill set, basically, within that sport. But then 20% of the overall performance is really dependent on psychological factors and your support network around you. Which, when you're in, I use this, come back to rowing a bit, but we're talking about winning a race by tenths of a second. And when you think of 20% of the overall performance being psychological, that's a massive amount. And it's the same thing if you spread out, if you look at all sports at the Olympic level, the difference between gold medal and 5th place is usually tenths of seconds or seconds in general. So that's a pretty tremendous component. And the other part of that is, for a little while I was out in Colorado Springs doing a little bit of work in the area of the U.S. Olympic Training Center, and they had just released a study after the Olympics, polling their athletes of what went well in your preparation and what didn't go well in your preparation. What would you do differently if you had that entire cycle over again? What can the Olympic Training Center do better? And almost all the athletes came back saying the only thing they really wish they had done more of was prepping their minds for the events, more mental training. They felt like they couldn't have done more physically or nutritionally, but the mental prep was where they felt like they had a bit lacking. So within that 20%, this study broke it down to 50% of that, so that another 10% component coming from the act of sort of mental strength. Some of the processes we'll talk about today: visualization, being able to set goals, having a personal mantra, and then of this again 20%, 30% coming from your support team around you. Well, another 50% coming from your support team, 30% between those directly related to your goals, and then family and friends being another 20%. I think as I communicate to athletes, it's a big component to have that support network around you. So as you go through life and you're seeking your own personal goals, they might not always be shared directly with those around you, but it really can contribute to your success.
How are you?
So yeah, 20% family and friends. If you have to find good friends, basically. So we'll boil this down. I know that this wasn't meant to be a really science-based talk at all, but it just boiled down sort of how the mind copes with various decision-making, and then talk about how that relates to performance. But if we make it really oversimplify things, the mind can be simplified into decision-making through a limbic system, or the prefrontal cortex being a more executive decision-making process. So the limbic system related to what they call the chimp brain, which is really fight or flight. It's the part of the mechanism of the brain that takes over when you're really in danger or you're in a real high stress setting. And there's the more thoughtful means of developing thought and developing physical reaction to something that's happening in a game or a running race or a cycling event. So there are definitely, first thing is to figure out just amongst yourselves where you feel you're hardwired. If you feel like you take over more with the limbic system, or you feel like you can really process well. So examples being, pull out here out of the campus and someone immediately cuts you off in a car and you slam on the horn, and you throw up the bird and you scream and yell. That would be an indication that you might be driven a little bit more limbic in that regard. Or your boss really ticks you off and you fire off that email and you hit send before you really think about the consequences. We've all been in that that at one point or another, I think we've all been in that act of talking, speaking, acting before we really think about what the consequence is going to be. And then those that really can take a moment, an event in a race, for example, getting passed by another athlete, and instead of reacting out of raw emotion, control it and then execute your own race as you go. Does that make sense to everybody? So in sport, I see a lot of basketball players actually, but other sports are very physical, hockey as well. A lot of times teams will pick on those that are driven more in the limbic system. So if they know they can get a player to foul out, they're going to be very physical with that athlete and see how they react. And if they get more physical, then they're going to shoot themselves in their foot for their game. So you see some athletes wearing a rubber band around their wrist. So every time they're in a little fight or flight situation, they reach down and snap the rubber band as a physical cue to pull them out of that mindset. We had a sports psychologist come in from the UK, who works with a lot of the football teams there, soccer teams there, and I found this very fascinating. He works with their team, which you would think is his big job, but his role is also to analyze the psychology of other players and other teams, and to seed the media with quotes throughout the week leading up to an event that will really trigger those players to play poorly. So he picks on those that are going to be more limbic, and he'll put things in to just say he doesn't think they're going to play well in that week, and here's why. And it gets them really fired up to come out with emotion. And when you do that, you really start to lose control of your motor skills and burn a lot of energy, unwasted energy, to play in a poor manner. The same thing, though, can happen when, for example, you're bike racing, you get a flat tire. There's a moment of just being present and dealing with a flat tire, or you can completely fly off the handle and think, my race is over, I can't believe I got a flat tire, and have that cascade of emotion go the wrong way. But it happens in running races, it happens in cycling events, and it happens in our daily driving or communication with people sometimes. So any questions on that? In relation to, I think if you feel like you are a little bit more emotional with the thought process in everyday life, if you can try to be a bit more thoughtful and cerebral with it, it'll help cue the same thing to happen during a sporting event. And the other thing is, when you find it happens in a sporting event, or it happens in training, and or just your daily stress management, if you can at least identify that that's the way you function, and try to hardwire thinking the other way, it'll be there on race day, it'll be there in your everyday life. So I think that's a pretty important skill set. I have a ton of athletes, though, that are very emotional, both on a sort of a win or a high, and on a low, and dealing with that. So I think to moderate that is a big deal, and moderating energy and moderating the mental strength component. So we'll first start off a little bit more dialogue towards everyone here is talking about some half marathons coming up and more race events, and we'll talk about that specifically, and then we'll go a little bit more into this the everyday life. So as you approach a race, I like to think of that fight or flight mechanism in the body as a really important physiological tool for survival. So if a saber-toothed tiger jumped out of a bush, you'd be able to survive, which is really good. So it's kept us alive kept our human species alive for a long time. But that same emotional release happens over a long period of time when you're approaching an event, whether you know it or not, to different degrees. Some people get nerves a lot more than others, but say you've got a big final coming up for school, or you've got an event you've prepped for a long period of time, that same release is starting to happen every time you think about the event. And when it's released over a 2 or 3 week period, it can really wear down the body, for sure. So every time you think about that event, same stress hormones get released in the body that would happen in that emergency event, but just filtered over a long period of time. And it usually, most of the actual body's response to that never is interpreted as a positive in the body. So you feel like you're nervous, you feel like you're weak, you might feel injuries that you didn't feel before, and all those things start to breed a negative psychology. So anyone felt that before, or have dealt with that before?
For sure. I feel like a few weeks ago, because I didn't really train over spring break, I ended up going on a trip, which I had planned when I made my schedule. And so I didn't really train, and then afterwards I upped my mileage, and then I was like, oh yeah, my knee really hurts. But then I was I started lifting again and incorporating that, and then it went away. So I think that speaks to that.
Definitely.
Miles.
It's never a good, the mind, you're never happy as an athlete when you start to feel those things. But generally when the training's up at a higher level, you're building for, say, a marathon or half marathon, the endorphins that are released on a daily basis and all the movement of the body tends to mask a lot of the injuries that may be present. And I think that, especially in the taper, is if you have that ability to cut back and believe in your training, dial it back to be rested on race day, you start to feel all those things. You feel lethargic, you feel injuries that you probably had in a way, but aren't that big a deal, and then the mind blows it up to bigger proportions. So again, you can sort of read through all the things that happen in that emergency response, but all those things tend to happen to various levels as you start to think about a stressful event, whether it's sport related or not. And then the taper, again, as you go through it, we cut back on our overall volume, and you've got less endorphins released, you've got more time on your hands, more time to think, which is really a dangerous thing. And then typically, athletes will put on a little bit of weight in that time period because they're not burning as much energy. And then this balance between the blood sugar and insulin tends to leave people feeling really quite flat and fatigued and tired. So also not a great feeling whatsoever when you're going into an event that you feel like you want to be really strong and energetic for. So any questions there? Pretty straightforward. So most of this honestly is just, if you know that that's happening and you can basically spin it as a positive, then you're gonna set yourself up in a much better setting and more optimally for the race. So if I know I'm getting butterflies, or if I feel like I'm feeling flat, if you can just tell, that mechanism is really quite incredible, and it's completely natural, and it's what allows us to perform at a higher level. So if you just basically respond that this is normal, and that's exactly what's happening, now I am prepped for the event, that can be probably the biggest tool that I know of to really arm yourself with a bigger positive instead of thinking of it as a negative. Recognizing it, I think, is good, so you're not trying to deny it, say I feel fine, I'm really good. And then the get moving will really help with the blood sugar and insulin release. So if you actually, I'll just use race day for example, you sit around before a half marathon and just stand around, that tends to be when the body feels really flat, you feel like you're getting really tired. And just try to get a longer warm up in or get more movement going, which will use that blood sugar and then allow yourself to prep optimally as well as warm up. Breath is a huge one, so deep inhale through the nose, long exhale through the mouth. You can control your pulse quite a bit that way and relieve a lot of stress. And detailed focus on a pre-event routine, I think is really key. So it can be as simple as how you're lacing up your shoes that day, or how you lay out your clothing, or what you pick for pre-race nutrition. But the more you can focus on the details of the events leading up and being present, the more you can dissipate that idea that you're constantly thinking about that one, the one event as a giant, as one giant scary event. When you're doing the pre-race routine, it's also good to rehearse that in training as well, so it becomes just a normal cycle. So if whatever you do on race day is completely abnormal to what you do in training, then it's going to feel not as natural to the body. So that goes with eating food, is you pick your pre-race nutrition, and then the actual act of warming up, which is pretty straightforward as well. Good on that? This, you can read through this, but the basic gist of the central governor theory is that Tim Noakes proposed this, and I know the varying levels, people will argue this is actually on the, not necessarily the mental strength component, but it plays a role. Essentially, if I want to sum it up, if you always train in a 7:30 mile, your body gets able to adapt to that. If you go out and plan on race day to run at 7-minute mile, 30 seconds faster per mile, in general, the brain essentially senses a state of danger, and it doesn't want the body to get hurt. So it'll start to deactivate muscle groups to make you dial back the intensity. You won't be able to recruit everything that you normally would, and therefore you won't be able to perform at that goal race. So part of that is training and getting the body to go through a broader range of intensity so that you've driven 60 miles per hour, then you can certainly go 50 rather than training at 40 miles per hour and thinking you're going to go 60 on race day. But it also, I think mentally, it changes that perceived effort, which is exactly that. Perceived effort is what you perceive as an individual, of pain level, of pace level, and your training, both physical and mental, can shift that perceived effort quite a bit on the scale. So there's been a lot of studies on marathoners, on their physiology of what makes them a great marathoner, and there's several in that mix of the list that don't have the VO2 max or the lactate level values of the elite runners, but they have an extremely high pain tolerance and a very different level scale of personal perceived effort. So a lot of times when we have people work out in classes, we'll talk about perceived effort, but it is completely different, and you have the ability individually to shift that through training and through mental reinforcement. So there's a book I read, I just like the title of it, I thought it was pretty neat, but the title of the book is Mind Gym. Has anybody read that before? It's essentially, the premise of the book's name and title is that we all go to a gym, or we all go to a workout space, we go run on the road, or we go to the trails, or we go to the gym to lift, and we create our own time and space for the workout. But rarely in our day do we ever take our mind to the gym and create our own time and space for that component. I mean, honestly, at best, a lot of people may do some deep breathing at night before they fall asleep, but rarely, does anyone carve out time during the day to say, for the next 10 minutes, I'm gonna do mental exercise? So I thought it was kind of a neat concept that you could certainly think about incorporating, evening, especially as you de-stress. This can be applicable to everything, but taking some time and space away from just the physical preparation to prepare the mind. And I started up here with goal setting. With a lot of athletes, I differentiate between targets and goals. For a lot of people, it's completely one and the same. But a goal and a target, if you only have goals, I'll say, a lot of athletes we'll take a 5K for example, a lot of athletes might say, my goal is to run a 20-minute 5K, which would be a very time-based, result-oriented goal. And if they finish the race in 20 minutes and 15 seconds, they didn't meet the goal, and therefore the overall mental interpretation is that they failed. They didn't meet the goal. So the training didn't work, and it's sort of termed a failure. But I think if you can restructure your goals to be more personal in how you develop as an athlete, as an individual, I think it can bring a lot more self-worth and self-development into the equation, which I think is really important. So targets, I'd say, would be the ones that would be more time-based in this setting. So a target could be, I want to run a 20-minute 5K. But the goal setting for any athlete that I'm working with, I'd want to be very personal. Like, what are the things deep down that you think you have to do to get to that target, if that makes sense? So if you know that you're a person that, as you're running or racing, you have that little negative dialogue in your head thinking, I can't do this, or slow down. Maybe it's simply I need to rewire more positive self-talk and have a more positive mental dialogue as I run. Maybe it's knowing that I don't eat well, I don't sleep as well as I should. Those would become goals that would lead to the target. So the basic bottom line is that, and I think it should be more, none of us are collecting a paycheck for the most part in these races, and we do it for self-improvement, for our own health, both mental and physical. And so if you run that 2015 on race day, then you have something else to look back and say, you know what, I was really positive the whole race. I really felt like I executed as well as I possibly could. And along this way, I didn't miss any training. I prepped as well as I could have. There's nothing more I could have done. Then there's a little bit more positive to draw from that event. Does that make sense to everyone? Rather than just saying it was a time-based goal, I didn't get there. So I think that's pretty important. It can be very individual of where you go with that. But for a lot of people, it's being honestly a little bit better to yourself on the mental side. So if you're a runner and you say, as you're running, you say, I suck at hills, then you will be a hill sucker when you get to the hill. But if you can reinforce the positive part, I love hills, that's my strength. I'm gonna keep my cadence up and I'm gonna just crank up the stills where I make it up on other athletes. You've already set yourself for that's back to the attitude element, right? So that's important. Visualization, I really think it's quite fun to see who can do this in vividly and in time. And we don't have time for it today, but what I like to do with our run groups is I'll have a run group run a mile personal best on the track and to actually take the time and then go into a room and have everyone close their eyes and run the mile as vividly and in real time as possible. And when you finish the mile, they keep their eyes closed and they raise their hand. And I sit there with a stopwatch. And it's amazing how many people run the mile in 45 to 50 seconds. Because mentally, they're just like, okay, I'm running, going around the track once, going around the track twice. Okay, I'm done with the mile. Instead of really thinking about what every step would feel like and having a sense of that, without counting seconds too. I've had people do that. Brutal. To see how close people are to their actual time. So how vividly can they visualize that in their head of themselves running the mile on the track or the road and actually approximate the time based on that vivid visualization. And we do the same thing with cruise and race. Whether it works or not, I think it's pretty fascinating. Usually when we do it, there's about a 2 or 3 minute gap in our rowing boats, which is not a good sign because they're all in the same boat. They should be crossing the finish line at the same time. And then towards the end of the season, when they do that exercise, they're usually raising their hand within 5 or 10 seconds of each other in a silent room going through the race. And it's amazing when you do that, actually make yourself do that, maybe just do a 400. It's amazing how many thoughts come into your head that have nothing to do with running or cycling or whatever else it might be. And it's really hard to keep your mind present and focused on that task at hand. All of a sudden you think about an email that you have to send, or your phone buzzes, or you've got something else going off. Really hard to do that vividly, but you can practice with smells, the feel of grass, or what the track or the road feels like, and make that as vivid as possible. And also for cycling or for other events that might be a little bit more dynamic, you can play through, okay, this is me getting a flat tire and me getting off the bike to process this, to change the flat. It's quite incredible. Whether it's just sort of urban lore or not, there's some great stories about visualization. One was a POW actually that was stuck in a cell for, I forget, a year or something. And when he got back to the States and was brought back, they said, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to the all-you-eat-can-eat buffet, see family? He said, I want to go play golf. And he said, every day in the cell, I played 18 holes of golf. And that's how he got through the day. He would visualize driving to the course, selecting the clubs, playing every single ball, and played 18 holes every day in his head. And first game of golf without swinging a club in 2 years, one of the best rounds he's ever played after coming out of the POW experience. But there's a lot of those. And you'll see it in the Olympics as well. People talk about, there was a quote in the newspaper that said, how are you feeling tomorrow, to one of the track athletes, and they said, I've already played this race through so many times in my head. On the last lap, I have the best kick coming around the track, and I run away with a gold medal, and that's exactly how the race panned out for that athlete. Obviously talented, but have the self-confidence to really visualize how they want to perform. Clearing the mind, I think, is really important in our day and age. It's important in general, but everyone has so many things they're juggling, and with technology, it's really challenging to, even when we go run now, there's so much technology hooked up to our body. We've got the phone on our arm and the earbuds in, the watch that's beeping with the pace, and you're getting text messages as you're running. It's a bit brutal. I mean, it's kind of nice that we have all that technology, but clearing the mind, I think, is really important, particularly going into an event. So there's various ways to do that. One I like is sort of visualize sitting at a table, looking out through a window as far as you can possibly see on the horizon. So over the nearby mountains and foothills, over the trees, out towards the ocean, this very broad expanse of a view. And then just work on narrowing the view back down. So you come back from the ocean to the detail of the trees and to the mountains and to the sort of backyard that's right outside your window, and then dial it back to the desk you're sitting at. And oftentimes that people write down all the things that are on their mind, and then take that piece of paper crumpled up and throw it in the garbage to actually go through a physical mantra of clearing the mind. Other people can do it pretty well with a few deep breaths and get on with their day. But I know for myself that oftentimes it's a really big issue. And in a race, it's a big issue too. If you're racing and you're thinking about how you're doing a marathon, and I wonder how I'm going to feel at mile 25. I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat, thinking about what's this guy next to me going to do. There's just too many things that use up energy that really are beyond our control and will ultimately hinder performance on race day. The positive self-talk, I think that's a big one. Getting a mantra that is positive is a really big deal. And that goes along with being good to yourself on a daily basis. I think if going back to hardwiring the brain, I do this all the time. I'm trying to be better about it, but so you're running out the door, say you leave your wallet or your bag back at the house and you take off and you're driving to work, and the immediate thought is, I'm such an idiot, I just forgot my X, Y, or Z. That is hardwiring the negative self-talk. You're beating yourself up, and when you feel like the body's not performing optimally in a race, it'll tend to go back to that same thought process. I'm really not prepared for this, I'm weaker than I thought I was, or I really have to back off. So if you can do that and be better to yourself on the day-to-day self-talk, it'll play a role into your racing. And then controlling the controllables is pretty straightforward, but we've all woken up for an event and the weather is not at all what we had thought it was going to be. And half the field, whether it's just a general 5K, local 5K, or the Olympics, are going to beat themselves mentally before they even get to the start line. So, because they don't like to be in the rain, or they think it's too cold, or it's too hot. So the best thing you can do is embrace the environment that you're in, because it's completely beyond your control. You've got nothing in terms of energy expenditures really going to change those things. Same thing with a flat tire, same thing with another competitor trying to change your race plan. That's kind of an interesting one. If you go ahead and pinch your arm really hard and squeeze really hard, and try to think about something else as you're doing it. I mean, squeeze really hard, but think about how sunny it is out today, or doing something else. Keep squeezing really hard, and then now keep squeezing hard. Colin's done. Now just focus in on the actual what's happening physiologically. The same squeeze. You're just thinking about, okay, I've got pressure on the skin, and I'm getting signals from that part of my body. There is pressure, and you're really focused on that actual point. And then go ahead and release. What did people notice? What changed? Did anything change when you did that? Was it worse when you dissociated away from it, or was it worse when when you focused on it directly.
I think it was worse when we disassociated with it. When you
That,
focus
for
in on
most
it.
people, is the biggest thing. A lot of times when we get into a race, and I'm not sure this will work in labor because you don't want to really go into graphics of what's happening. Just kidding. But no, I think a lot of people in running or endurance events try to dissociate away from the pain and think about other things, and it actually ramps it up and makes it worse. Sometimes just thinking about, okay, all I need to do is breathe in and breathe out. It's as simple as breath, and this is a natural thing that's happening. Of course, I'm racing at a high intensity, so it is going to be painful. And being okay with it, I think, is maybe more important than trying to get away from it, which a lot of people try to do. And so that plays into mental training as well. Do I have to wrap up, or can I keep going a little bit?
Yeah, some people have class. Yeah.
Okay, if you need to leave, definitely roll, and I'll try to wrap it up really quick. A couple ones that I heard were really good on our team recently. A member of the women's team said, I think of myself as a 7-year-old watching me in present time, and how I want to show that 7-year-old how sort of the person I am, or being a role model for that 7-year-old me, which I thought that was kind of a cool one. I had an athlete, I've told the story to our team, but I had an athlete, we were talking about 2,000 meter rowing events where it's a really intense pain thing, and I was asking people how they cope with it, and I had one guy who becomes an alter ego and has another name for himself when he's doing the test, which I thought was very fascinating. It's like, who are we talking to right now? We're talking to but it's very interesting what people will develop as a strength for themselves mentally. I think the big part simply is identifying if that is a component, and then try to bring it into everyday life, because you're never going to outgrow your sort of weakest vision of yourself, if that makes sense. And I know that everybody can deal, I think, work self-development and a self-development standpoint from that. A few quick things. The extra degree, I don't know if people, the 212 degree concept, it was sort of out there, a little more of the Tony Robbins motivational speaking thing. But at 212 degrees, water boils. At 211 degrees, water is just really, really hot. So at 211 degrees, you've got really, really hot water, and 1 degree more, at 212 degrees, the water is boiling and has enough power to make steam and to power a locomotive. And when you're racing, you never really know where you're at on that spectrum. Or maybe when you're working on a paper or you're working your career, you really don't know where you are at that spectrum. Are you at 210 degrees? Or you're down at 180 degrees? But when are you going to put in that 1 extra degree that's going to make the water boil and take off? So that's that concept when your races are tenths of a second, or you're thinking about your career development. It's easy, I think, for anybody to get into that. I'm working comfortably hard, but maybe I'm not making this thing really take off. Like if I just put in that 1 extra degree, I'm at mile 12 of the half marathon, I'm up against the wall. What's going to happen if I just put in that 1 extra degree and go through that wall? The story of the bumblebee, NASA studied everything in flight. A bunch of engineers got back together, said, we studied the bumblebee, it can't fly. And all the scientists said, what do you mean it can't fly? And they said, well, the surface area of the wings isn't big enough. Its body's too big for its wing size. There's no way scientifically this thing can take flight. And so they basically said, well, why can't it fly then? And they had no other answer other than, well, no one's told the bumblebee it can't fly. So, and then the last thing, porous racing, I like to think of, this is more specific to endurance sport, but the coach I work with is really talks about this a lot, and I really like the concept, is there's this thin veil between sort of life and death. It's very, very fragile sort of veil that we kind of, in racing, get to push through and open up the pores of that veil more and more. So you get to feel what it's like to push just outside your body. And I think that's a huge, it's something that I'm really drawn to in racing, and I'm drawn to other people that are drawn to it in racing. I think it's, when you come back inside your body, it makes you value how fortunate we are to push ourselves that way, and it's just a neat opportunity to explore a frontier that is one of the final frontiers in sort of human nature. We're not exploring new grounds in the world anymore, but personally, you have that opportunity to explore all sorts of frontiers, both physically and mentally. And I think that's really something that draws me to endurance sport, and it can carry over to other aspects of life, parenthood, other stuff. So thank you. Everyone should roll, but I really appreciate your time. And we'll be back on Thursday for focus on core strength specific to runners. And yeah, very thankful for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.